Hello everyone, hope you're doing well, that you had a nice beginning of the week. Welcome back for today's EU news review. What do we have on the menu today? Today we eat well because we're going to talk about the EU-US trade deal and how the latest threat of Trump to increase the level of tariff on cars is kind of creating some issues while the parliament and the council are negotiating to try to get the existing EU-US deal adopted. So we're going to read about that. Then we're going to read about Russia and how the Europeans are a bit worried because, okay, we're getting into the time period where maybe Putin could be tempted to do something against the EU, but really won't he? And at the same time, the EU is trying to figure out what to do with its old but unused Article 42.7, which is the mutual assistance clause of the EU treaties, meaning that if a country of the EU is attacked, the other owe that country assistance, but it's obviously never been used. And member states are kind of thinking about how they could make that a bit more concrete, and the reluctance also of some member states about that because of NATO, etc., etc. And to finish, we're going to talk about the EU-Mercosur trade deal, which officially started applying from last Friday, temporary application. And so we're going to read about what's the consequence of that this provision. I was looking for the word for this provisional application of the trade deal, and why it went a bit back into the mind of people. We're not talking about this trade agreement that much anymore. And so that's what's the program for today. As usual, if there are other things you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers and a chat. So you let me know and we discuss. What else do I have to tell you before we start? Don't forget that on Saturday we are doing the Europe Day stream because it's the 9th of May, so Europe Day, so I'm doing a stream which is going to be a good chunk of the day. I'm still working through the detailed program for the day, but the way I'm currently organizing thing is that in the morning I would stream in English, and in the afternoon I would stream in French. So I'm that's for sure. Like morning it will be in English, afternoon will be in French, and I'm now like trying to fill the agenda accordingly. I'm still waiting for a couple of confirmation, preparing a few things. Hopefully I should be able to post on Discord and the social media the detailed program for that day, so that you know exactly what's going to happen during this stream. I say the stream as if it was going to be like a full day stream. It's probably not going to be a full day stream. I'm probably gonna like cut in the middle, like to go have lunch and touch some grass. But anyway, I'm probably gonna be streaming a good chunk of the day. But yeah, expect the detailed program probably on Thursday. At least I hope to be able to do it by Thursday. And yeah, it's gonna be cool. So be sure to come back here on Saturday morning or afternoon, or both if you speak both French and English. And yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of introduction of special things to tell you. And without further ado, let's start this news review up. We're going to start tac. I'm putting the right thing. There we go. We're going to start talking about the EU-US trade deal and how Trump is creating issues with the tariff that he announced on cars, increasing into 25%, as you see. And this article is from last Friday, and then we're going to look at the consequences within Europe around that trade agreement. So, as a reminder, or trade agreement, it's not a trade agreement, but a reminder when Trump launched last year a trade war against the entire world that led the EU to sort of conclude a deal that is not a trade deal, but it is more a political deal last August with Trump, the so-called soonᵀᴹ agreement, in which both sides, the US were committing to not tax European products at more than, by default, at more than 15%, and in exchange, the EU was committing to remove all tariff on a number of products, industrial products, agricultural products from the US. And since then, so the EU has been going through. I'm just checking my sound. I look like going a bit in the rain much. I hope I'm not like destroying your ears. If I do, let me know. I will just like lower the level of my mic. So do let me know. Hi, Mez. What was I saying? So yeah, ever since then, the EU is trying to get that deal through. So the Commission made a proposal. The councils and member states approved that proposal. Then it went to the Parliament, and the Parliament made a bunch of modification to the deal. And now there is negotiations between the Parliament and the Council. And the US is increasingly losing patience with the EU, which led to Trump raising the tariff on car to 25%, despite the agreement that he had with the EU, that he concluded with the EU that he could not go above 15%, and now putting a bit things into shambles. So let's read it. So Trump and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen agreed to the trade deal last July, which set a 15% tariff on most goods. I don't know why I always think it's August, so actually no, it's July, but anyway, it's July. So US President Donald Trump said on Friday that he will increase the tariff charged on cars and trucks from the EU to 25%, so this week now, a move that could further jolt a global economy already rattled by the Iran war. Trump said in a social media post that the EU is not complying with our fully agreed to a trade deal. He gave no further reasons for the planned hike, but the announcement comes at a particularly tense time for relations between the White House and the EU. On Thursday, Trump renewed criticism on German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, telling him to focus on ending the Ukraine war instead of interfering on Iran. Because Friedrich Merz made some criticism on Trump regarding Iran, saying, actually, Iran didn't really lose against the US. The US didn't win, and so a bit bashing Trump, and Trump did not like that at all. And in retaliation, first he announced that he would remove 5,000 troops from Germany, since there are American bases in Germany as part of NATO, and so he announced that he would remove 5,000 soldiers from there, and then he announced these tariff on cars, the 25% tariff on European cars, which are using officially the fact that the trade deal, the deal that I made with the EU has still not been approved by the EU, and so they're breaching the deal. So I'm increasing pressure. Many read that as actually being another jab at Germany, because obviously when Trump is talking about European cars, he's mostly talking about German cars, so he's doing that to hurt the German economy in retaliation. But for now, it's just announcements. We don't know. He hasn't made it actually into law, so to say. He doesn't actually increase the tariff yet, but the announcement has been made, probably as a tit for tat against the German. Germany would likely be hit hard by a sharp tariff on cars and parts, as it is responsible for a significant amount of EU auto exports. He also referred to European allies Spain and Italy as absolutely horrible for their refusal to get involved in the Iran war. So here you have the not the tweet, but the thing on Truth Social, so the social media of Trump. In a statement to journalists, a European Commission spokesperson said that the EU has in fact been implementing its commitment in line with standard legislative practice, which is to say basically we made the proposal and now they are negotiating, and has been keeping the US fully informed throughout. While the bloc remains fully committed to a predictable, mutually beneficial transatlantic relationship, it will keep its options open to protect EU interests, the spokesperson added, which is a way to say, remember, we have also on our side a bunch of tariffs that we prepared against the US. For now, they are frozen, but maybe we could do things with them if Trump decides to relaunch the trade war. Bernd Lange, a lead MEP, German, currently negotiating the implementation of the deal with EU member states, criticized Trump's announcement as showing clear unreliability and accused the US of repeatedly breaking its commitment in its trade relations with the EU. And the fact that he's talking about unreliability is not innocent because the Commission made the legislative proposal to kind of implement the Thunberg Agreement, which put at 0% the tariff on some American products. And the council, some member states have said, okay, they just rubber stamped the thing, they didn't change the thing. Basically, it would go through as it is. But the parliament, on its side, changed the proposal of the commission and added a number of safeguards, specifically arguing about the unreliability of Trump and the fact that the EU needed to be protected from further measures from Trump. And typically, they introduced a sunset and a sunrise clause, meaning what does it mean? A sunrise clause meaning that the deal would only come into force once the US has done X, and a sunset clause, the deal needs to be renegotiated after X years, which I think is something like 2 years. So the parliament wants to add further safeguards into the deal, which the member states and the commission are not so keen on, because of course, if the commission, if the EU says, okay, here's our side of the deal, well, with a number of safeguards, that means that de facto, they're changing the deal, and so potentially they will have to renegotiate the Thunberg Agreement with the US to make sure that they accept this sort of safeguards, which of course the member states and the Commission do not want to do. And now with the new threats of Trump, Bernd Lange, the MEP, is saying, well, you see, the US are not reliable, hence that's why we need the safeguards. Because otherwise, what we don't want is a scenario where we do everything that we have to do by the agreement, and Trump breaks his word and just keep doing shit regardless of the deal, and we are kind of stuck because we adopted a law that reduces the tariff, and we can't change that, at least not quickly. So Trump and European Commissioner von der Leyen agreed to the trade deal last July, which sets a 15% tariff on most goods. Both the US and the EU had previously confirmed their commitment to preserving the trade framework known as the Thunberg Agreement, which was named after Trump's golf course in Scotland, where they concluded the agreement. But the status of the 2025 deal was first called into doubt after the Supreme Court this year ruled that the Republican president lacked the legal authority to declare an economic emergency and charge tariff on EU goods. I'm just reading the next paragraph to see if it explains things. No, okay. So basically what happened, last year, Trump declared his trade war on everyone, and he raised the base tariff for everyone. Like he said, by default, I'm going to put a certain amount of tariff on all countries because there is an economic emergency, blah 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 blah. These in that situation led to the conclusion of some agreements between the US and other countries, including the EU, because the other countries didn't want this very high tariff, and so they negotiated something to give like unbalanced deal that gives to the US more stuff than they give back, but at least put an end to the trade war. Problem for Trump, the Supreme Court said, well, actually, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to unilaterally say, well, now I'm increasing tariff on everyone, inventing an economic emergency without approval of Congress, etc., etc. And so this tariff that served as a basis, as a reason for all these trade agreements with the EU and others, kind of became irrelevant. They disappeared from one day to another. They became illegal, and so they went back to 10% as it was before no, not even 10%. It was before. It was after. It went back to the previous level of tariff, and so there were questions. Well, given that the Supreme Court said that the tariffs were illegal, do we even need that trade agreement anymore? Like, does it have any use? Like, since the Supreme Court said that what Trump did was illegal, and therefore it's not applicable anymore. So you had this question, and so far the Commission and member states have decided, okay, regardless of the Supreme Court decision, we believe that it's better for us to maintain the deal with the US, because if we say, well, actually we don't want that deal anymore, Trump is going to go back into a loop and throw random shit at us, and we would rather avoid that situation. So let's just stick to that deal, regardless of the Supreme Court decision, and carry on. Like, let's avoid a new conflict with Trump. So yeah, that's why they're talking about the Supreme Court. So the initial agreement had been a tariff ceiling of 15% on goods from the EU, but the Supreme Court reduced that to 10% as the Trump administration launched a new set of import taxes based on other laws. So reduced by default to 10%, and then Trump, having lost his tool, say, okay, I can't do like a blanket tariff. I can't say all of a sudden, I decide that all goods coming into the US will be at that much tariff. I can't do that. Fine, I will use other laws to put tariff. It will take me some time to do so, but I'm going to find ways around that. Which is also another reason why the EU said, okay, let's stick to the deal with Trump, the Thunberg Agreement, because they said, yeah, if he wants to put tariff, he will find a way to do so. So let's just like leave that aside. We have this agreement. Let's implement it, and that way we don't have to worry about Trump playing with all the rules or the laws to put higher tariff on us. The Trump administration is in the middle of investigations on trade imbalances and national security risks to impose a new tariff regime, which could ultimately put the agreement with the EU in risk of violation. The EU has said it expected the bilateral deal would save European car manufacturers between 500 and 600 million euro a month. The value of EU-US trade in goods and services amounted to 1.7 trillion euro in 2024, or an average of 4.6 billion euro a day, according to EU statistics agency Eurostat. Bear in mind that it is there, the 1.7 trillion is goods, so physical stuff, whatever you want to send physically to the US. Services, it includes banking services, digital services, etc., etc. And the balance on this thing is that when it comes to trade in goods, so in physical stuff, the EU exports to the US more than it imports, meaning that it's a net positive for Europe. But for services, it's the reverse. We import much more services from the US than we export them. So we in the red on services. Which was the argument of the Commission. So, when Trump was complaining about trade imbalance, saying, oh yeah, look at the trade with the EU is unfair to the US because they export much more than us, the Commission, the member states, were saying, well, on goods, yes, but look at services. We are importing much more than we export to you. So all in all, it balances out. So we are good in some areas. You are good in other areas. So we are complementary. Trump didn't give a shit, of course, and used that as a basis for his trade war on everyone. So a deal is a deal, the European Commission said in February after the Supreme Court ruling. As the United States' largest trading partner, the EU expects the US to honor its commitments set out in the joint statement, just as the EU stands by its commitments. EU products must continue to benefit from most competitive treatment, with no increases in tariff beyond the clear and all-inclusive ceiling previously agreed, meaning that no matter what, we can't have, by default, more than 50% tariff. Trump's announcement comes amid negotiations between the government of EU member states and MEPs over how to implement the EU-US deal and bring tariff on most US industrial goods to 0%, as required by the Thornberry Agreement. EU lawmakers are seeking to attach safeguards after past threats by Donald Trump over Greenland. These include a sunset clause under which the deal expires in March 2028, so it's a 2-year deadline, unless both sides agree to extend it. It also includes a sunrise clause, which would make tariff preferences conditional to the US respecting its Thornberry commitments. So, a reciprocal deal. You respect your part, I do my part. Member states are split between those behind France and Spain, who back the European Parliament's tougher stance, while others led by Germany and Italy favor preserving the deal as it was agreed in July 2025. That's the classic split between the hardliners and those who would rather play it cool with Trump. Earlier this year, MEPs suspended the pact after the United States Supreme Court ruled that some of the tariffs imposed in 2025 by Washington were illegal, prompting Trump to announce a fresh 15% duty on imports. Emily Zeliana Zovko, lead negotiator of the EPP, the largest political group in the European Parliament, told Euronews that they should refrain from doing the same this time around. And the EPP, so the Conservative, are quite keen until now to get the deal through. So they are kind of aligned more on the German position, saying, okay, let's just get the deal through. That will give us certainty. Let's not rock the boat any further than we need, because otherwise we're just going to antagonize him and we're going to go into escalation, and that's not good for the economy. We should have the deal done and then fight for better relations with the US, she told Euronews. So yeah, let's focus on maintaining working relations with the US, because we need them on a bunch of stuff, rather than trying to react to whatever BS he comes or announces. So that was Friday when he announced the new 25% tariff on cars. Now, we're going to go through the reactions of each of the institution, Commission, Council, and finally, Parliament. So, a deal is a deal. Von der Leyen hits back at Trump's latest tariff threats. The European Union is prepared for every scenario if Donald Trump unilaterally hikes tariff on EU-made cars, says Ursula von der Leyen. So Ursula von der Leyen has hit back at Donald Trump's latest tariff threat, stressing the United States is constrained by a limit that prevents it from increasing duties on its own, so the so-called 15% cap. Sorry, just move something there. Okay, we're good. Where was I? The US president shocked Europeans last week when he suddenly threatened to raise tariff on EU-made cars from 15% to 25%, alleging non-compliance, so saying that the EU was not respecting its deal, so I'm increasing the tariff to put pressure on them. A deal is a deal, and we have a deal, and the essence of this deal is prosperity, common rules, and reliability, von der Leyen said on Tuesday in Armenia. We want from this work to achieve mutual gain, cooperation, and reliability, and we are prepared for every scenario, she added, hinting at potential retaliation. As a reminder, during the height of the trade war between the EU and the US, the EU was working on a package of counter tariff that was worth, if I remember correctly, like something like 95 billion euro. And those tariffs were frozen, they were just about to be approved, and then there was the Thornberry Agreement, so the EU just, it was not agreed that. There was kind of a ceasefire. They said, okay, we negotiate, so we're just pausing everything. So the EU paused the 95 billion tariff package, but it's still frozen. It's just frozen, so it's still there. So technically, if the EU wanted to retaliate quickly against the US, they still have this package of 95 billion tariff on various US goods that they could unfreeze and potentially implement. So you have a bit of a stick to retaliate. And then you have, that's for the immediate answer. Then you have further answers that you could have, notably the so-called trade bazooka, which is the anti-coercion tool, which is a law that allows the EU theoretically to retaliate heavily against a country that is basically doing economic coercion against the EU, and the name, and try to nuke the economic footprint of the US in the EU. That's a tool that it's, like I said, it's the trade bazooka. There's been a lot of debate last year around this trade bazooka, with notably France calling for its activation, so putting the gun on the table to force the US to drop its trade war against the EU. The EU has refused so far to use it, but technically it's part of the arsenal that the EU could deploy. Would they deploy it? That's another story, but that's part of the arsenal and something that is in the back of everyone's mind whenever Trump is threatening the EU with anything. Up. The President of the European Commission, who oversees trade policy, the trade policy is mostly a European competence, said the bloc was in the final stages of implementing the pillar of the EU-US trade deal designed to eliminate tariff on a wide range of American products. The legislation is being negotiated in the European Parliament, where it has been previously delayed due to Trump's forceful attempt to seize Greenland from Denmark. Trump has a great sense of timing, in the sense that pretty much at every point, whenever the Parliament was going to do something around the EU-US trade deal, Trump was announcing some random bullshit that was pissing off the Parliament, and Parliament say, "Oh yeah, you want to play like that? Okay, fine. I'm freezing your trade deal." So he announced tariff. He announced he tried to take over Greenland. So that led the Parliament to say, "Yeah, screw that. Your trade agreement, we're freezing it until you see." So when the US abandoned its attempt to take over Greenland, Parliament restarted its process. But yeah, like Trump is pulling off his threats just as the Parliament is negotiating with the Council to try to finalize things. So you could say, "Oh yeah, that's a negotiating tactics to put pressure on the Parliament," blah blah blah. But still, great sense of timing from Trump to piss off the Parliament. So MEPs have amended the original text to strengthen safeguards. According to the joint statement published by Brussels and Washington last year, the US was meant to lower tariff on EU-made cars upon the introduction of the legislation rather than its final approval. Meaning that from the moment the Commission published the proposal, so said, okay, this is our proposal to implement the Thornberry Agreement into law, the US was supposed to be bound by the 15% cap on tariff. So it was not conditional on the law being finally approved, meaning that in theory, the deal was already applied. And hence why the Commission said, by announcing, if Trump puts 25% on cars, tariff on cars, that means that he's breaking the agreement that we had, because that deal was applicable from the moment we proposed the legislation. It's not linked to the approval of the law. So technically, we did what we promised we would do. It's going through the motion, but it's Trump who is breaking the rules, not us. At the same time, the US committed to an all-inclusive cap of 15% on EU goods, precluding the accumulation of additional duties. So that's the specificity of the EU deal, and what makes it arguably one of the best deals that any country / area got with the US is that it's an all-inclusive cap, meaning that no matter what, by default, you can never go above 15%. It's the maximum by default. You can have tariff, like sectorial tariff, like for instance, you still have tariff on steel and aluminum that are at 50%, if I recall correctly. But that's a different thing because it's on, let's say, sector-specific process, because they accuse the EU of breaking the rules in the particular sector of steel, and so that's not covered by it. But it's not like the 50%; it's by default, and no matter what, it can't be above 15%, which makes it a bit different, for instance, from the UK deal, because the UK got a deal where the US was committing to a 10% tariff, so on paper it looks like lower than the EU, except that it is not all-inclusive, meaning that it's 10% on top of everything else. They just promise, okay, we will have whatever normal tariff we have, and we promise not to add more than 10%. Which means that if you add on goods already a 10% tariff, the new British tariff is at 20%, meaning that it becomes higher than the EU. So technically, there is probably some goods on which the UK has a better deal than the EU, because let's say if you have a deal, if you have a good where the base trade tariff was 0, then the trade tariff now is at 10%, so it's better than the 15% of the EU. Again, assuming that the EU would be at the maximum, which is not necessarily the case. But in general, the EU has one of the best trade agreements because of that all-inclusive cap. The alignment with the agreed ceiling is still outstanding, von der Leyen said, demanding respect for the different democratic procedure. Basically saying, here we have a little thing called democracy, where we have a law, and the law needs to go through parliament, negotiation, blah blah blah. It's not, we don't just do that by executive order like in the US. Speaking by her side, Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, said the 27 member states fully supported the work of the Commission and its president. Since Trump posted his threat on Friday, Brussels has been seeking clarity from Washington about the reasoning behind it, while signaling its readiness to respond. Maroš Šefčovič, the European Commissioner for Trade, is expected to meet with Jamieson Lee Greer, the US trade representative, later on Tuesday on the sidelines of a G7 gathering in Paris, France, to discuss the matter. Trump's announcement has been linked to the comments recently made by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who said Iran had humiliated the US in the war. Germany is the largest car maker in Europe and is heavily dependent on exports. Merz himself has denied any connection between his remarks and a 25% tariff, so of course he's not going to say, oh shit, that's my fault, sorry about that. So yeah, and again, like for now, Trump made the announcement. It has not yet translated into actual law. So you know the saying, taco Trump. Taco in the sense it's an acronym that was invented, if I remember correctly, by Wall Street. TACO meaning Trump always chickens out, meaning that he always makes announcements, makes a very big provocation, and then he doesn't do what he says. There's a few bets on saying, yeah, Trump is doing the threat of 25% tariff, but he will not actually do it. All right, so that was Commission. Let's look at Parliament, at Council, Member States. Sorry. EU finance ministers urge caution amid Trump tariff threats and trade tensions. EU finance ministers meeting in Brussels on Monday and Tuesday sought to downplay US President Donald Trump's fresh tariff threat. Some view this announcement as yet another post on social media by the US president, so yeah, okay, Trump is shitposting, what else is new? The EU's 27 finance ministers have so far reacted cautiously to US President Donald Trump's threat to impose 25% tariff on EU cars. Meeting for an Economic and Financial Affairs Council in Brussels on Monday and Tuesday, the ministers said they would adhere to the framework agreed with the US in July 2025, which limits US tariff on EU goods to 15%. The deal now is being negotiated by EU governments and MEPs ahead of its implementation, with the bloc committing to remove tariff on US industrial goods. We have a deal and that deal is being negotiated. We are willing to keep on with this deal in good faith and we hope everyone is in the same frame of mind, French Finance Minister Roland Lescure told journalists ahead of the meeting on Monday. Lescure and others echoed Ursula von der Leyen's stance, who earlier on Tuesday said the institution would remain very calm, which has been like kind of the strategy of the EU and member states with Trump, is that whenever he's doing bullshit, we don't play the game, we don't go into escalation, we just don't react, we play it cool, and we just carry on and see what can be done without answering provocation, etc., etc. And basically say, okay, he's pushing me, I'm not pushing back because that's either he's bluffing or I'm not going to escalate further. I'm just going to say, call our facts, deal with it, and we negotiate. So that's kind of the agreed strategy on how to deal with Trump at EU level. And member states also have that agree with that strategy of saying, okay, let's not go into a war of the tweets whenever Trump is throwing random bullshit around. What was I? Okay, so a deal is a deal. That's what we just read. Blah blah blah. We want this to work, and we're prepared for every scenario. Meaning, we still have the retaliation package. So Trump's threat to impose 25% tariff on EU cars came after German Chancellor Friedrich Merz criticized the US war in Iran. Washington also announced the withdrawal of 5,000 US troops from Germany, further straining transatlantic relations. So he's having a bit of a fit against the Germans. German Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil said on Monday that Berlin wanted to avoid escalation, but was prepared if tensions intensified. We want to have a common path with the US, but of course, it is clear that we are also prepared, Klingbeil said. The Commission also said that options remain open on the European side if the US threats are carried out. Last year, the EU suspended a package targeting 95 billion worth of US products, so that's what I was mentioning earlier, after weeks of trade disputes with the US. But though the package was suspended, so actually they never came into force, but it's there. Like you have that gun on the table technically. That can be relaunched like this if member states decide to do so. The option of deploying the bloc's anti-coercion instrument was also repeatedly raised in 2025. The mechanism allows the EU to retaliate against economic pressure from third countries by restricting licenses or intellectual property right alongside traditional trade defense measures. So basically, it's not just that, it's really like on paper, it's literally the nuclear button, economic nuclear button, in the sense that it's meant not to be used. It's the gun that you put on the table saying, hey, if you fuck around, you're going to find out that I can nuke your economic footprint in Europe through traditional tariff, but also like preventing, reducing the protection of intellectual property right, like in this case, American intellectual property right into the EU, preventing licenses, by also preventing US companies from competing in public procurement. So when the public authorities are putting a contract out there, so barring them from this sort of contract. So plenty of things technically that the EU can do to destroy or damage as much as possible the economic footprint of the aggressor, in this case the US. But again, it's a tool that is not meant to be used. Basically, like I said, and it's the gun you put on the table. Like, let's say that tomorrow member state decides to activate the anti-coercion instrument. That does not mean that from tomorrow all the sanctions that I mentioned are being applied. No. Actually, what happened is that there is kind of a 6 months transition period where you put the gun on the table, the commission is officially investigating whether there is actual coercion, but also is supposed to open discussions with the other country concerned, so in this case it would be the US, to try to find an agreement. Basically say, hey, we have 6 months to find an agreement and put an end to your bullshit. Otherwise, magically I'm going to confirm that there is coercion against us, and I will start taking measures, economic measures against you. So it's not like an immediate retaliation. It's you launching a countdown to put pressure on the other and force a negotiation, because at the end of it, well, I could push the big red button. Last year, France was pushing all along like to activate it, to say, okay, let's launch it, and that way we add pressure on Trump to negotiate a deal, while the other was saying, oh no, let's not do that because we're going to escalate, etc., etc. So there was a whole debate around the anti-coercion instrument, which has never been used. But yeah. Where was I? Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo, for his part, was reluctant to respond, viewing it as just another social media post from the US president. So, okay, just shitpost, don't react to it. With regards to this weekend's news of 25% for cars or trucks, there is no measure, no specific executive order, it's just a tweet. Therefore, there would be nothing new beyond that of the tweet, or in this case, of that intention, he said. Meaning, okay, Trump shitpost, as long as it does not become concrete, like tomorrow he's going to forget about it and move on to his next trend, no need to get excited right now. European Commissioner for Trade Maroš Šefčovič is scheduled to meet US Trade Representative Jameson Green on Tuesday to ease tensions with Washington ahead of the G7 Trade Minister meeting. Lescure and French Trade Minister Nicolas Forissier are also expected to talk with their US counterparts the same day. So it arrives at the moment where, luckily enough, the EU and the US were supposed to meet to discuss. So there might be an opportunity to clear the air. Let me just check something. Okay, cool. Now, just put that aside. It was something for Saturday. Any question on that? Or we can move on to the Parliament's reaction, which is fairly interesting. Up. I don't see anyone. So then let's move on. Shite. I lost my page. There we go. All right. Parliament's reaction. Weber, so the president of the EPP, threatens plenary vote on the US trade deal. The EPP chief threatens plenary vote if there is no deal tomorrow. The European People's Party, so the EPP leader Manfred Weber, has threatened to end negotiations with national diplomats on the EU-US trade pact and send the issue to a plenary vote. The threat comes ahead of a second round of negotiation between MEPs and the Council, due to start on Wednesday evening and aimed at making progress on the so-called Turnberry deal closed at the Donald Trump's Scottish golf course last summer. If the trial this week does not produce a result, then we, as the EPP, will simply put the Turnberry agreement to a vote. Weber, who chairs the centre-right group in the European Parliament, told reporter on Tuesday. The proposal under the Turnberry deal scraps tariff on hundreds of US agricultural and industrial goods. Where was I? Trump has recently threatened to raise tariff on EU cars, claiming the bloc is not complying with the agreement. EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič is expected to meet US Trade Representative James Greer in Paris this afternoon. Weber described the threat of a full parliament vote, which could see the trade deal approved with a far-right majority and significantly fewer conditions, as an appeal to the Social Democrats both in Berlin and at the European level. Europe must show that what has been signed also can be delivered. So there, in the parliament, you have an internal fight also about that trade deal, because, like I said, in the position of the parliament, you have the introduction of safeguards. The parliament said, okay, fine, we can live with that trade agreement, but with conditions, being those safeguards on the sunset and the sunrise clauses. The EPP of Weber was never a big fan of these proposals. They were much closer to the member states, saying, okay, we need to go through with this quickly, because otherwise our economy, our companies are going to be threatened by tariffs, blah, 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 so let's just get over with it. Let's not add too many stuff. They were convinced / pushed by the others to agree to these safeguards, and they stuck by it in trilogues. So the first round of negotiations between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, with, as I remind, both the Commission and the Council having kind of the same position, which is, this is the agreement, we don't change a dot on it, and it goes through. That way, there's nothing to renegotiate with the US. While on the Parliament wants these additional things, which would mean in theory that the EU may have to renegotiate part of the deal to have the US accept these safeguards, which of course the Council and the Commission do not want to do. And now, timing. Parliament, the second trilogue is supposed to take place tomorrow. And just at the moment when Trump threatens 25% tariff on cars, eating at the Germans mostly, the EPP, led by Manfred Weber, who is German also, is saying, okay, enough play, drop the safeguards, let's just go through with it. And basically say, maybe not drop the safeguard, but say, okay, if we don't have a deal, fine, I'll push through a vote on the agreement as it is. Like, we're not doing the safeguard things, just the text of the Commission as it is, and I'll vote for it. And probably the far right will vote with me. And that is meant as putting pressure on the socialists and the liberals, who are quite keen on having these safeguards, to say to them, hey, guys, either you drop the bullshit about the safeguards and play ball with the Council and find an agreement tomorrow, or fine, I'll do it myself. So there you have the EPP with kind of actively trying to sabotage the Parliament position, which it's not supposed to do because there is a mandate and everything, but you could see that the threats of the tariff on German cars de facto made the leadership of the EPP pretty nervous, who want to be done with the whole thing. Where was I? Blah 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 blah. Okay. During the first meeting in April, Socialist MEP Bernd Lange, also German, the parliament's lead negotiator, said he was confident that more than 2 rounds of negotiation would be needed to reach a deal. The main sticking point concerned the parliament's push to attach conditions to the proposal. The move is spearheaded by Lange, with the support from negotiators at Renew, the Greens, and even EPP MEP Jürgen Warborn, who had advocated including a sunrise clause that would make the deal conditional to the US lowering tariff on steel and aluminium derivatives. I had forgotten that the rapporteur of the EPP had supported the sunrise clause. The sunrise clause. So now you even have the boss of the EPP who is going over the head of his own negotiator. MEPs are also pushing for a sunset clause, an expiry date for the agreement by March 2028. Negotiations are complicated by the Council's softer approach, as it prefers to keep the deal close to the version originally proposed by the Commission. Lange told Euractiv that without a strong outcome of negotiation with the Council, there is no majority in the European Parliament for a weak deal. Basically saying, okay, the lead negotiator is saying, okay, either he tells the Council, he tells the Member State, okay, either you agree to my thing, or you will lose the vote in Parliament. Except that now you have Weber, who is kind of implying, well, maybe not. Again, depending on what the far right would vote on this. But technically, again, remember, the EPP has a choice in terms of majority. The EPP can have a majority, the traditional pro-European majority, so with the Socialists, the Liberals, and the Greens. But since this mandate, it can also have a majority with the far right. And so Weber is kind of waving that around to the Socialists. Hey, remember, I have this alternative majority, so quit pressuring the council, make a deal, otherwise I will go see the far right and I will make a deal that is not what you want. So a bit stabbing in the back the socialist. He added that delays in negotiations followed Washington's threat to annex Greenland and the Supreme Court ruling that struck down most of Trump's tariff. The German MEP's remarks were echoed by Karin Karlsbro, a Swedish lawmaker from the Liberal Renew group. It is not serious by the EPP to rush to a vote on an agreement that lacks support in the European Parliament due to pressure from the US, she told Euractiv, adding that Trump's recent tariff threat clearly underlines the need for the Parliament's proposed safeguards. The Commission, on its side, did not respond to request for comment. So basically, the threat of Trump is creating divisions within the parliament because the EPP, the biggest party, is kind of saying, okay, fine, let's get through with this and drop the demands of the parliament, because of course the council would likely not agree to the demands of the parliament on the safeguards. So there, Manfred is breaking ranks to try to give the US what they want, which is the deal, and kind of move on from this. And so tomorrow we'll have the end game, the last trilogue. Well, probably not the last trilogue, but the next trilogue could be the last if indeed Lange says, okay, I don't have a majority, so I'm gonna do what the council wants to an extent, or will Lange call Manfred's bluff and say no, I maintain what is the mandate of the parliament, because there was a vote and this is the mandate, and because where in trilogue, what is important to understand is that, so it's negotiation between commission, or technically not. Technically, it's a negotiation between the council and the parliament, and the commission serves as a sort of trusted intermediary. Technically, it's supposed to facilitate the discussions. In practice, the commission is also a party to the negotiation, so it's also negotiating. A bit more, let's say, staying a bit more in the background than council and parliament, but technically, yeah, they are also an active negotiator. And both the parliament and the council, when they meet in a trilogue, the negotiators, they don't just show up and do whatever they want. They have a mandate, meaning they have instructions from the people they represent. So in one case, the member states, in another case, the European Parliament, to tell them who adopted each their position, saying, okay, this is what we want on that text, and this is what the negotiator is supposed to defend. So Lange, negotiator of the Parliament, Bert Lange, he has a mandate from the Parliament to defend this particular version of the agreement. The Chypriot presidency, which is the one negotiating on behalf of the Council, has a mandate from the member states on their version of the temporary agreement. And so then you have the negotiation between the two and see, okay, what can we get as an agreement? And so the text that is initially approved by the Council, by the Parliament, is just a starting position, a starting mandate of negotiation. It's kind of the point of reference, but it evolves. How does it evolve? After each trialogue, after each round of negotiation, basically the council presidency, let's say, so the Chypriot, will go back to the council and say, okay, this is what happened during the negotiation, the parliament wants this, the commission says that, blah, blah, blah. And they will ask member states, okay, given this situation, this is what I recommend. Do you agree with me? Do you give me potentially... do we stick with our position, meaning we don't change a thing? So we say we have our position, this is our position, we stick to it, and I can't move from it. Or do we have what they call flexibilities, meaning the Chypriot would ask member states, okay, on this point, let's say the sunrise clause. Let's take a concrete example on the sunrise clause. On this sunrise clause, this is something that is important for the parliament. I don't think I can fully dissuade them from that, so they won't agree to remove that. So do you agree to give me flexibilities on the mandate, meaning allowing the Chypriots to go to the next round of negotiations, say, okay, on the sunrise clause, okay, I understand that the parliament, it's important for the parliament, let's try to find a middle ground. And so I'm open to agree potentially to something that was not in my initial mandate. So that's on the council side. The Chypriot presidency is asking for flexibility in its negotiation mandate. The council, there's also like internal dynamics, because the presidency also has its own interests sometimes. Technically, the Chypriot presidency, as the presidency, is not supposed to represent the Chypriot position. It's supposed to act as a kind of a neutral party. So it's not supposed like to push its own position in the negotiation, only the common position of the council. In practice, the presidencies also play their own game, because obviously they have their own position, and they can also sometimes play with fire or play with the mandate of the council, forgetting to report certain things to the council, etc., etc. So you have also an internal dynamic in the council between the presidency and the other member states. The other member state wanting to keep control of the presidency, and the presidency also wanting to kind of do its own thing during the negotiation. On the parliament side, after a trilogue, of course, you can't go back to the plenary to have a vote on making the mandate evolve. So instead, what happens? Well, on the parliament side, you have the rapporteur, which is the lead negotiator, in this case, Bert Lange. But Bert Lange is not the only one in the room. Around him, he has the shadow rapporteurs, who are the negotiators of each political group. So Lange is socialist, but he also has around him Karin Karlsborough, which is the shadow negotiator of the Liberals. He has Jürgen Warborn, who is the negotiator of the EPP. So those are the lead people, one representative per member state, per political group. And these negotiators represent the interest of that political group. And so what happens is that after the trial, or in preparation of the trial and after the trialogue, let's say in this case after the trialogue, Lange will summon a shadow meeting. So a meeting between him and all the other negotiators of the political groups. And they will say, okay, you saw how the negotiation went. What do we agree? Do we agree to change the mandate? How do we evolve? And so basically within that group of rapporteur plus shadow rapporteur, they have control of the mandate of the parliament, meaning that these people can decide, okay, we can drop this part of the demands of the parliament, or ask this in exchange, etc., etc. So they have much more flexibilities among themselves to modify the mandate of the parliament. But they also have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, if they have a deal, the final deal will go to plenary. So they need to also keep in mind, okay, what are the dynamics of the parliament beyond that small group, and making sure that the position they explain is backed by their own members. Greens are the best party for it. Well, that's one opinion. Where was I? So yeah. So that means that the negotiators have to basically maintain a balance between their own position, the discussion within the shadow meetings, but also with their own political groups. For instance, Jürgen Warborn, the negotiator of the EPP, well, he's negotiating with Lange and the others, but he also has to report back to his own group, the EPP, to tell them what's going on, especially on a very politically sensitive thing. And he will tell the EPP, okay, this is the situation, this is how I think we should behave, etc., etc. And then, depending on the sensitivity of the thing, the other will trust him to do what needs to be done. Or in this case, given that it's a very sensitive thing, when you are reaching very sensitive and final parts of negotiation, for instance, Jürgen will probably pick up his phone, call Manfred, the boss of the EPP, or Manfred will call him to discuss it and say, okay, this is the situation, what do we do? I want to do this, do you agree? Do you back me? And so there's also internal negotiation within the EPP, because maybe Warborn wants something, but Manfred wants something else, and so you're going to play, you have other delegations that may be something different, and so you have also internal fight within the group. Let's stay on the EPP. The German EPP will not have the same position maybe as, I'm inventing, let's say the French EPP. So maybe the French EPP will try to also put pressure on Warborn to tell him, careful, this is important for us, so take us into account, blah, 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 blah. So you have all internal negotiation in the parliament to maintain the balance within political groups, and then within the plenary, the global plenary, because at the end of the day, like I said, Lange, if he makes a deal with the council, so they find an agreement, that agreement must be voted by the entire plenary. And so if he made a shitty deal, or a deal that the other don't like, he's gonna lose that vote. That wouldn't go well for him. So he also has to take that into account. So it's a fairly complicated dynamic, even if on the side of the parliament, the negotiators have, I would say, usually much more margins of maneuver to change their position than the council, which the council is using to its advantage many times by telling the parliament. Let's say that parliament wants something in the trilogue, in the negotiation. Parliament will insist, oh, this is important for us, we want this, we want this, we want this. And the presidency, the council, will say, oh, you know, I would like to help you. I would be open to do what you want or to make a compromise, but I don't have a majority. I can't. Like, the council doesn't back me, they don't want that. I don't have flexibility in my mandate, so I can't do anything. So, either you accept my position, from which I'm not allowed to move, and I can't move, or we're stuck, and there is no deal. So usually the council will use its lack of flexibility as a way to force the council position on the parliament. While the parliament on its side will maybe play the political card to try to force the end of the council. For instance, I know something that an example I know, something that I know happened. I don't remember which legislation it was, but there was one negotiation on the text. It was like the very final. It was supposed to be the very final agreement, a very final negotiation, a round of negotiation, and there was like one issue left on the agenda, one last thing that the parliament and the council did not agree on, and they was being stuck because council didn't want to move, parliament didn't want to move. And so we were heading to a failure of the negotiation. And basically the lead negotiator of the parliament put his balls on the table and told the presidency, well, tomorrow morning at 9, I'm calling a press conference and I'm saying that we found an agreement with you, and that agreement is this thing. I will announce it. I will have all my shadows behind me to say that this is the agreement. Feel free to then say the contrary. Go ahead and say, okay, thanks for coming. I'm leaving. Basically, putting the knife under the throat of the council presidency, telling them either you find a way to tell the member states to agree to what we want, or you're going to be responsible for, politically, we'll make you responsible for failing an agreement. And the parliament won. The council said, fine, we agreeing to your bullshit thing. You can do your press conference. We'll be there. And we'll say that we found an agreement. Other things that the parliament can do sometimes is also play the presidency against the council, because as you remember, the presidency. So for now we are on the Chypriot presidency. Presidencies change every 6 months, and naturally, a presidency always wants to have as many agreements as possible during his presidency, because that way they can say at the end of the presidency they can say, oh look, I concluded X amount of legislation. Look how great my presidency was, and try to show look back home. So we are showing look how influential, how important our presidency was. So you tend to have a tendency of presidencies to want negotiations to go fast so that they can finalize as many deals as possible, as many agreements as possible, and so increase kind of their scoreboard, so to say, their final score as a presidency. So they will put pressure, and the parliament there usually will say, "Oh, you know, us, we are all the time in the world. Like, if it takes 2 months, it takes 2 months. If it takes a year and a half, it'll take a year and a half. I don't give a shit about your presidency." And you know, maybe in some time you can have a strategy like this, that you know that one presidency is complicated, but the next one is as a national position that is closer to your position. And so as the parliament, you have an interest in saying, well, you know, I don't give a shit if I make a deal with you, because the one coming after you is much closer to my position, and so they will make a deal that could possibly be better than what you're proposing me, unless you agree to get closer. So sometimes, like, the parliament on its side is also able to weaponize the calendar of the presidencies to put political pressure and gain some margin of maneuver. In practice and in general, the council tends to be the one that has the upper end in negotiation. So in quite a lot of cases, council tends to be the winner. For many different reasons, either because their text is also technically better than the proposal of the parliament, because they can claim, I don't have any flexibility, so this is this or this is it or nothing, because the commission is back in the council, etc., etc. So in general, council tends to be the one who has the upper end in negotiation, but parliament has a few tools at its disposal to twist the arm of the council politically, and force them to accept at least some of the things that the parliament is wanting. And like, you have the trilogues are very interesting, because I did a few trilogues myself. I did trilogues on different legislation. So I did 2 cycles of trilogues. Not all assistants do trilogues. Some do many of them when they are in a committee with a lot of legislation. But you have assistants who can work, like if you have an assistant who is working in AFET, so in the Foreign Affairs Committee, he or she can work 10 years in the parliament and never have done a trilogue in his life. While if you are an assistant in the URI committee or in IMCO, so legal affairs and internal market, they are doing trilogues all the time, because their committee is competent on legislation. Anyway, trilogues are very interesting because they are like the final stage of EU politics, and everything. I mean, not everything, but many things are done in preparation and anticipating that. Like, for instance, Parliament, like I said, like when the Parliament votes, usually when the Parliament votes, it's not the final position. It's not the actual law, the final agreement. It's usually just the position of the Parliament, the negotiating position of the Parliament, the mandate. And when you do that mandate, when you negotiate among groups, you take into account that it's only a mandate of negotiation, and that then you have the trilogues. And so there are things that you do because of that. For instance, as the lead negotiator, you can either accept some demands from the other groups that you don't agree with, knowing perfectly well that council will kill them for you. So yeah, it's not important if I get this random bullshit proposal in it. Council is going to kill it in trilogue. And I would say, I will be able to tell the other group, oh, so terrible, I'm so sad the council doesn't want that, let's drop it. Or, on the other end, you will accept very bold political proposals, things that are like, are a bit unrealistic, or very politically ambitious, but you do them basically to have bargaining chips. So you will accept these very bold, very ambitious proposal from the parliament, you're going to hype it up, say, yes, this is very important for the parliament, because you anticipate that in the negotiation in trilogue, you will use that as to get something in exchange. You will hype up this proposal, say, yeah, the parliament is very, very supportive of this proposal, this is key for us. And then during the negotiation, at some point, you will say, oh, well, okay, this is very important for the parliament, but you know, in the spirit of compromise, we are willing to drop it in exchange for something else, which is the actual important thing for the parliament. So you have this whole dance in negotiations where you have sometimes like accumulated some things that you either you know are trash and are going to be killed by the council, or things that you use as ammunition for exchange, like things that you can sacrifice to the council to get something in exchange and defend what is actually politically important for you. So trials are very interesting in that sense, because then also you have, for instance, the rapporteur will have usually a pet issue. So there will be one amendment, one thing that is very important for him, but just for him. But he's the rapporteur, so he's the most important negotiator on the side of the parliament. And so the commission and the council will kind of be incentivized, okay, we don't like this thing, but it's kind of the pet issue of the rapporteur, is the one thing that he cares about. So if we give him what he wants, in exchange, he will give us a lot of what we want. So again, it works both ways. Anyway, very interesting thing in terms of negotiation dynamic. Any questions on that or the US trade deal before we move on to our next topic, which is going to be defense? Just moving something aside. Does that work well? That works well. Magnifique. Okay, I don't see any question. Let's go into next topic. Defense. So it may not have escaped your keen eye that war is back on the European continent, and we have one particular actor, namely Russia, that is not exactly the most friendly neighbor we have. And there is many suspicions that, maybe Russia could try to, at some point, attack Europe to get the Baltics or to get something else, using the weakness of NATO and the weakness of the EU. And so, in this context, the EU has been doing kind of a wake-up call, especially since the election of Trump, and trying to, we need to rearm, we need to increase our level of defense to prevent Russia, disincentivize Russia from attacking us. And there is this deadline. Most intelligence services in the West say that in theory, Russia could have the capabilities to test the EU, test NATO by 2030. 2028, 2029, 2030. So everyone has in mind basically the idea, we have until 2028, 2030 to prepare ourselves to a level that Russia/Putin would be disincentivized from attacking us because, we could retaliate. And now, as the article says, there is this fear that we may be already too weak, and that Putin may be tempted to attack already. So Europe fears Putin's window of opportunity is now. The next 2 years could provide Russia with the perfect chance to test the West's commitment to NATO. But some governments and the alliance itself consider the threat overblown. European governments worry Vladimir Putin will see this as his moment to strike. Defense officials and lawmakers fear the Kremlin will consider the next year or two, while Donald Trump is still in the White House and the EU hasn't yet reinforced its military capacity, as the time to test the West's commitment to NATO, according to 3 EU politicians with direct knowledge of the discussion interviewed for this article. While Russia's war in Ukraine has shown the limits of Moscow's might, the Russian president has long signaled his desire to take more territory. Something could happen very soon. There is a Russian window of opportunity, said Mikael Tola, a Finnish center-right member of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. The US is withdrawing from Europe, transatlantic relations are in shambles, and the EU is not yet fully ready to take on the responsibilities for themselves. So, as you know, most EU member states are members of NATO, so the defensive alliance. The key part of which being Article 5 that says that if a member of NATO is attacked, all the other basically commit to helping defend him. So basically you attack one, you attack 32 countries. So that's that has been the baseline for the European security ever since World War II, since the Cold War. And the cornerstone, of course, of NATO was, and still is, the involvement of the USA, the strongest military in the world. And so, for many years, the fact that if you mess with NATO, you mess with the US, that was the biggest way to dissuade anyone from doing anything against Europe. But with the election of Trump putting into question NATO constantly and saying, I'm not certain I would actually defend Europe against an aggression, so I putting into question whether the US would actually respect its NATO commitments. The Europeans are like, oh shit, we might be on our own, and as of today, on our own, we're not big enough to really dissuade a Russian attack. Hence why the efforts on remilitarization since the war in Ukraine, etc., etc. And so now we are in this transition period where the EU is trying to increase its military capabilities, but it's not there yet. And Trump is still in power in the US, meaning that there is uncertainty on whether the US would get involved or not, creating another layer of weakness that potentially Russia could be tempted to exploit to test the alliance. Not necessarily like invade Europe, but rather like, what happens if I do an incursion? What is the reaction? If the reaction to an incursion is nothing, because Europeans are not ready and Trump doesn't give a shit, well, maybe that means that I can go a bit further, and a bit further, and a bit further. So testing the actual red lines of NATO and potentially like sabotaging it. While defense officials and policymakers don't rule out Putin's launching a ground offensive in a NATO country, they say it's unlikely given how stretched Russia is in fighting Ukraine, according to one senior NATO diplomat and 3 senior European defense officials talking under anonymity. Of course, given that Russia is struggling in Ukraine, makes it a bit complicated for them to go open a new front against the EU and potentially against the US. Instead, it's far more likely he'll do something more targeted or carry out an incursion designed to create ambiguity, hoping to sow division in NATO over whether the action meets the threshold to trigger its Article 5 mutual defense clause or not, Altola said. So basically, Article 5, it's you attack me, you attack everyone, and you always have the debate, is something crossing the threshold? Of course, if Russia is to invade militarily the Baltics, obviously that's an armed aggression, so it's clearly crossing the threshold. But if you have something like small scale, if you have like a few soldiers that walk into NATO territory and set up camp. Is that an aggression? Is that not aggression? Debate. And so you play with the limit. You're trying to say, okay, what is the point where NATO will consider that it's Article 5 and we're throwing out the big guns and testing the limit further and further and divide internally NATO. So Article 5 declares that allies should regard an armed attack against one of them as an armed attack against all, but Trump has called NATO a paper tiger. He is due to leave office in January 2029. Putin could escalate horizontally against another neighbor, trying to avoid a humiliating negotiation with Ukraine. Gabrielis Landsbergis, the former foreign minister of Lithuania, who has also warned about Putin's window of opportunity, told Politico. While European defense spending have risen sharply in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the full impact will take years to be felt on the ground, according to the EU's defense readiness roadmap. The bloc wants to be ready to credibly deter its adversaries and respond to any aggression by 2030, according to the roadmap. So we keep in line this 2030 deadline, and that's kind of the objective that we give ourselves. It could be a small psychological thing that makes us scared. If Putin feels that kind of escalation makes us weaker and makes us feel threatened and reduces support for Ukraine, said Ninisto, the chair of the European Parliament's delegation to the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee and a former government minister in Finland, which shared 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia. Russia is not omnipotent, he said, but desperation is also dangerous. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said on Saturday that the greatest threat to the transatlantic community is the ongoing disintegration of our alliance. If Putin is monitoring Trump's commitment to NATO, then his domestic political challenges will factor in. If Republicans fare poorly in the midterm elections in November, Trump may look to win back his base by pushing harder against his bête noire, NATO and Europe, and pulling back further from support for Ukraine ahead of the 2028 US presidential election, according to a senior European defense official. So basically, if he loses, so in November, Trump has the midterm elections, so legislative elections. If he loses these elections, he may have as a reaction, shit, I need to reconquer my base, and so I will play the hits and say NATO is shit, Europe is shit, and thus weaken further the alliance and make it more interesting for Putin to test NATO, because Trump will not politically be incentivized to go to the defense of Europe, because, well, a good part of his electorate is isolationist. They don't give a shit about the rest of the world, and they would say, oh yeah, that's Europe's problem, that's not our problem. The US on Friday announced it would pull 5,000 US troops out of Germany. Trump threatened to do the same for Italy and Spain. There is a risk for an even worse turn in the US posture towards NATO because of the domestic political climate, said the senior defense official. To see off the threat, the EU must invest heavily and invest together to be ready to defend itself. And although Russia is weakened, with Ukraine penetrating its defense and striking deep in its territory, troop casualties are mounting and Kyiv managing to retake territory, this only serves to make Putin more dangerous for Europe at this moment, said Altola, the Foreign Affairs MEP. Escalating the Ukraine conflict to some other theater could give Russia a card to play with the war. The war is exhausting their resources, so they are looking for a way out, Altola said. And that way out is not peace negotiations, it's expanding the conflict. So what, we should hope for Trump to win the midterms? No, not necessarily, but you should hope that the Europeans get stronger so that Putin is not incentivized to test even if Trump is losing the midterms. Because if Trump loses the midterms, go after NATO and Europe, and at the same time Europe is not able to defend itself, that's where you have the window of opportunity for Putin. So while Europeans can't do shit about the midterms in the US, that's the Americans' problem, they can do things in Europe to reinforce defense and also like a prepare scenario for what if we can't count on the US, which is going to be our next article. Where was I? Putin has many soft targets to choose from, Altola said, and an attack could take multiple different shapes, with the Kremlin unlikely to do something so clear-cut as launching an incursion where NATO is strong, like the Polish border. It could be a drone operation, it could be a Baltic Sea operation, it could be something in the Arctic, targeting some small islands. They have the Shadow Fleets, which is already partially militarized, Altola said. So the Shadow Fleet is the fleet of cargo ships that Russia controls that are sailing with false flags, fake registration, etc., to basically continue exporting the Russian oil despite the Western sanctions, etc., etc. But they are also used as a basis for drone actions. For instance, we had a few occasions where you had, oddly enough, a bunch of drones that were appearing around sensitive areas in Europe, energy infrastructure, military bases, this sort of thing, while you had one of these ships suspected to be under Russian control that were there. So there is the possibility that since these boats can be carrying drones, they could be used as mobile bases to strike, to an extent, far away from the Russian border. A drone attack doesn't require troops, it doesn't require crossing the border. In launching such an operation, Putin would be seeking to place pressure on Ukraine's European allies while avoiding any potential US response. If there is no attack across the border, the US might say this is not strategically that important, Altola said. They are strained with their resources in Iran, so perhaps they would advise negotiations with Russia, and that's precisely what Russia would try to do with this. So basically, try to force the Europeans and the Americans into a negotiation where they agree to drop Ukraine in exchange of the end of tensions with Russia. Europe, of course, is not keen on that, but if they get attacked indirectly and that the US is saying, yeah, not my problem, there could be political pressure built at home in Europe to say, oh, look, we don't want tensions with Russia. Fuck these Ukrainians, we supported them for long enough. They can manage without us. Which gives a way out for Russia, because Russia doesn't want a peace deal with Ukraine, because they think that if Ukraine doesn't have any more the Western support, then they will not be able to progress as much, and therefore Russia would be able to get what it wants from Ukraine, while also weakening NATO and get guarantees from NATO on a number of things. Europe isn't united on its calculation of the severity of the immediate Russian threat. There is some tension between politicians from countries like Finland and Lithuania, who are raising the alarm and arguing Europe urgently needs to step up its anti-missile and defense readiness amid delays to US weapon deliveries due to the Iran war, and the more cautious approach in Estonia and NATO itself, where officials say any alarmist feeds into Putin's playbook. So do we panic or do we not panic? But those playing down the threat risk lulling Europe into a false sense of security, said Altola. This is actually the worst thing you can create in democratic countries, he said. We need to allocate resources, and if there is a false sense of security, then resources are not allocated to defense. Meaning, you don't have the means to defend yourself, and the day something happens, everybody panics. I was getting ready, fast playing Putin's playbook. Basically, the argument there is that by saying, okay, we have to prepare ourselves against Russia because we can't rely on the US, it's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy. In the sense that the fear of Estonia and NATO is by saying and acting as if NATO was now irrelevant and the US will not come to the rescue of the Europeans. Well, then that would make that happen because the US would say, oh, well, fine, you see Europeans, you don't want to do anything with us, you want to defend yourself, fine, perfect, you do you, and we don't want to get involved in your thing. So that's the fear, is that it would accelerate the departure of the US from the European theater. While if they don't play that much this, that of course there is preparation, but not overhyping it. You can still say to the US, look, we need your help. And also, you don't create, how can I say, stress. Because like, it's two sides of the same coin. Like, the false sense of security is bad because you don't invest in defense, and then when something happens, you're in shock, and so you want to drop everything, and so you will do anything to stop the threat. But you also have the other side of the coin, is that if you're overhyping the threat of war, the population will be stressed, will become increasingly divided, which is what Trump wants as well. So what Putin wants. Sorry, I'm too French. I can't see how accelerating US departure isn't a good thing. Tell that to the Polish. Tell that to the Balts. There's already a significant part of the population who is afraid of a potential war. In this kind of public debate would only strengthen. Yeah, that's kind of the indeed. That's the other side of the coin, is that if you hype up too much, we're going to be at war. You also dividing your own public opinion, which weaken democracies. Salut which weakens democracy, which is exactly what Putin wants. Democracy do not fare well when there is heavy divisions. Where was I? All right. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky suggested in a TV interview that Russia could be gearing up to make a move on one of the Baltics, for example. Senior officials in Kyiv have said that they are targets because of their support for Ukraine. The Russians are sending a signal because they've accused the Baltics of allowing Ukrainian drones to use their airspace, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha told reporters. Politicians in the Baltics have attempted to play that threat down. Officials in NATO are equally skeptics. Russia is very busy in Ukraine, Estonian President Alarkaris told Politico. I don't think it has enough capacity to try to wage war on the Baltics too. That argument was echoed by the senior NATO diplomat and 3 senior European defense officials. I find it highly unlikely, said the senior NATO diplomat. Putin's suicidal trend has its limits, especially when there is no apparent evident and immediate gain. It is clear that Russia sees itself in a long-term confrontation with the West, said the second senior European defense official. However, we currently maintain our assessment that there is no short-term military threat to NATO due to Russia's engagement in Ukraine. They can't manage 2 fronts at the same time. This does not mean we should not remain vigilant, as Russia may miscalculate our unity and resolve. In the sense that maybe Putin would make the wrong assumption that we are divided, and so try something, and therefore trigger a reaction. A 2-front battle is a very, very risky strategy for Putin, said the third senior defense official, especially as Europe is strongly progressing on building up its own defense. But as Karis acknowledged, Europe can't rule anything out. The same unlikeliness that led Russia to attack Ukraine? Well, there is a difference. There is a difference. Ukraine. I mean, you did not have the war in Ukraine back then, so Russia had all its army available for an invasion, and 2, you had small signs. You had the Russian army positioning itself alongside the borders of Ukraine. So you had signs that, okay, something is brewing. At the moment, the Russian army is mostly busy in Ukraine, and they don't see a build-up of Russian forces at the border with Europe. That being said, I agree that doesn't mean that Putin hasn't been doing anything. We've seen drones, we've seen a bunch of things happening. So again, it's not like everything is fine or everything is terrible. It's a bit in the middle. It's Russia and Putin have basically written the playbook for hybrid warfare, where you are carrying out microaggression against an adversary without crossing the threshold. So, hence, we have the drone sightings. We know that there is a bunch of sabotage going on. We know that the Russians are doing things here and there all around Europe. Does that mean that Russia is on the verge of invading Europe? Unlikely. Because, again, they don't have the capacity to wage war. That being said, troop build-up was 3 weeks before the full-scale invasion. It was longer than that. Like you had a long build-up. You had a long build-up. Like if I recall correctly, like the full build-up was 3 weeks before, but Russian forces were starting to show up at the Ukrainian border and in Belarus for quite like a few months before. Officially because there was an exercise, etc., etc., and but you had more preparation than this. It does not make me a lot more relaxed to know that we're 3 weeks away from war. Yeah, but, I mean, I would tend to say, I mean, again, wait and see, but while I agree that Putin will keep an eye on things and test the limits, hence why, well, Europe needs to sort out his shit and act on defense, and stop thinking that war is just a theory. I don't believe that Russia has the means for a full-scale war, even without the US. At least as long as the war in Ukraine is lasting, because like they're barely holding up the Ukraine army. They're not going to hold up Ukraine plus most of the European armies. Probably not. That being said, again, I agree that drones, yeah, they will definitely do things. They will definitely test the limits constantly. That's what they do. That's hybrid. Like that, the Russians are in hybrid warfare against us 2,000%. The Russians are carrying out hybrid warfare against us. There's no doubt about it. Because again, their objective is to increase fear, to increase division within the European society, and try to push the Europeans to drop Ukraine. If there is a sufficient fear of war against Russia in Europe, particularly in the Western countries, where, like, contrary to the Estonians or the Finnish, we are not bred from the crib to think that one day Russia will come back and we'll have to kick their ass. Yeah, you can play the card, oh, you know, we don't want tensions with Russia, so, okay, screw those Ukrainians, we did enough for them. That's the playbook. They want to weaken the Europeans, but their short-term objective is to weaken the Europeans so that they drop Ukraine. Then, if and when the conflict in Ukraine stops, that will be another can of worm. Because suddenly, you will have the Russian army that will be able to properly recuperate, that will have all the experience of 5 years almost of war with Ukraine, meaning they will have a level of expertise in drone warfare that is very, 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 very much more advanced than the Europeans. There will be a risk. And so that will increase the need for the Europeans, to increase their efforts on defense, but also to learn from the Ukrainians on drone warfare and everything. So there you have a new level of threat. Also because internally, remember that Putin, like any good dictator, the only thing he actually cares about is staying in power. That's the only thing that matters to him. And for now, what maintains him in power is the war. Because he's able to loop everyone in this idea, oh look, I'm defending Russia against an enemy, we need to stay united against the West, blah blah blah. His entire economy is only holding because everything, like you have the war economy that is artificially boosting part of the economy. The second the war ends, that collapses, and so that creates potential unrest. You would have all the war veterans coming back from Ukraine, which is arguably a big source of trouble. Because you will have people with massive PTSD coming back home, so crimes, civil unrest, etc. That becomes a problematic mix for Putin. So the irony is that Putin has an interest in war, at least a war continuing, the sense of the threat continuing, and if the war in Ukraine stops, that could spell trouble for him, because suddenly the Russians could say, hey, okay, now the war is finished. Putin, you kind of sold us on a lie there. And maybe we would be better off without you. meaning that Putin, I don't know why I want to say Trump, Putin needs to create another distraction, and so could become reckless with the Europeans, because it would be in a sort in a form of fuite en avant, where he would need to create another distraction to stay in power. That's where I see the risk. And where was I? Oh yeah, okay. You never know. Okay, literally two sentences left, so that's fine. Any questions on that before we move on to the next article, which is also about defense, but this time more on the pure European side of things? Wait, that's good. I'm good. All right. No more questions. Let's dive to the next one. Just checking the time. Yeah, we're good. All right. Now, like I said, we have NATO. Most European countries are part of NATO, which has its Article 5, which is the mutual defense clause. But in the EU treaties, you also have a pseudo equivalent to Article 5, which is Article 42.7, which is the mutual assistance clause. That says if a member state is attacked militarily, the other member states have an obligation to provide assistance to the attacked country. There are references to NATO, there are specific things for the neutral countries, etc., etc. But yeah, that is something that exists in there. That's been there since the Lisbon Treaty, so 2009. But obviously, that article has never been used in an actual armed conflict, and so while it exists in theory, what it means concretely, how it works, nobody has a clue. Yeah, France used it into 2015 for after the Bataclan attacks, but it was more political showing. That's why I said that you didn't have like an actual armed invasion, like a military threat. Like indeed, France used it, activated it once in 2015 after the Bataclan attacks, which basically allowed to free some forces in Africa to bring them back to France. So anyway, but beyond that, we don't have something that is very operational. We don't know what would qualify as something triggering 42.7. We don't know how it would work. Like the EU not being historically a military organization, contrary to NATO, it has no experience in this sort of thing. So with also the increased fear that the US are not reliable anymore, so NATO might be neutralized, the Europeans are like, okay, we need to maybe prepare for a scenario where we'd be on our own and make sure that our own mutual defense clause works well. NATO needs Article 5, I know, it's also after 9/11, indeed. But the EU and NATO do not have the same experience. Like, okay, you are right that there's never been an invasion of either, so indeed, we don't have that experience on that. But NATO being a military organization, it has a lot of experience in working out how things work. Like what NATO does constantly is exercises, making fictional exercises. Okay, if there is if there is an attack against one member state, one country of NATO, how would we deploy? How would we work together? Common standards. So NATO has actually a long history, a deep experience of gaming out how a potential activation of Article 5 would play out. There are plans. The armies are used to work together. There are exercises, etc., etc. You have a bunch of people who are used to talk about Article 5. There is a lot of discussions about like what would qualify, what would not qualify as Article 5. In the EU context, not so much. 42.7 is very recent, like 2009. Article 5, it's decades. So people had decades to think about it. 42.7, not really. The EU has no military competence, or very limited military competence. So in the EU framework, we don't really know how to do military stuff. That's not historically the turf of the EU. I find it insane we didn't have a mutual defense clause before Lisbon. Well, before Lisbon, I mean, remember that the assumption was always NATO is there. So why would we need to do something on defense, given that we have NATO? And for the longest time, I mean, Europe was not as deep a political organization as it was in 2009. For the longest time, the EU was just a single market, a common market. It was just like the kind of thing is that defense is NATO, economy is the EU. Everyone has its own thing. You had also non-NATO countries, but the idea was, okay, we don't have to deal with defense because defense is NATO, and that's fine. And true, last time the EU tried to talk about defense, that didn't go very well. We had the experience of the CED, the ECD rather in English, the European Defense Community, or Community of Defense rather, which was an attempt at creating a sort of European army within NATO. Back then, it was before we had the neutral countries, so all the countries back then of the EU were members of NATO, so the European Community of Defense was kind of creating a European pillar of NATO, so it was very intertwined with NATO back then. That initiative got killed by France, and since then, the EU was like, okay, fine, we don't deal with defense, we're gonna deal with the economy, and that's it. So there was no further incentive to deal with it. NATO was working. The EU had no reason to do so. Flash forward to 2009, situation is very different. You have a Europe that is now a much more political project. You had enlargement of the EU to countries that are close to Russia, close to unstable area and everything. You have the question of the neutral countries, etc., etc. So initially, that was, I mean, it was in the Lisbon Treaty of 2009. It was also in the Constitutional Treaty of 2005, if I recall correctly. So that's one of the parts that were copy pasted from there. So post Cold War, situation is a bit different. Hence why we did this mutual defense thing with the carve out, with the reference to NATO, with the carve out for neutral countries, etc. But it was like very much like a theoretical thing. And in a way, like recalling that, also anchoring the EU to NATO, because it says, yes, we owe mutual assistance to each other in case of attack. That assistance would be done through NATO for those who are member of it. So it's kind of also anchoring, like reinforcing the anchor of the EU to NATO to an extent. And now we have to make it operational, which is the topic of discussion. Where was I? Okay, so EU ambassador hold private discussions on the mutual defense clause amid rising geopolitical tensions. Representatives from the EU 27 countries are simulating how to collectively respond to a variety of threats spanning hybrid attacks to typical aggressions. But questions loom regarding the exact detail of the scenarios and outcomes. Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulidis has led the charge for EU leaders to pin down what the bloc's mutual defense clause could look like and how it could be used to support the security of the Union. That push has now moved from political debate into formal EU structures, with the issue discussed on Monday afternoon at a behind closed door meeting of the Political and Security Committee, an ambassadorial body responsible for foreign affairs and security matters, according to several EU officials. One of them confirmed the meeting to Euronews, but declined to comment further, describing it as a confidential exercise. Article 42.7 of the Treaty of the European Union stipulates that if a member state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, other EU countries have an obligation of aid and assistance. Discussions surrounding the clause first erupted when US President Donald Trump reiterated his threats of buying Greenland whilst not ruling out forced capture of the Arctic island. This sent alarm bells ringing for the NATO military alliance as well as members of the EU, as Greenland is autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, who is also a member of NATO. Christodoulidis brought the discussion to a head last month at an informal meeting among European leaders in the Cyprus capital, Nicosia, a month after an Iranian-made drone struck a British military base on the Mediterranean island. The Cypriot leader said that the clause needs to be clarified in full from start to finish. Suppose France invokes the article. Which countries should be the first to respond, he asked. What are that country's needs? All of that needs to be set out in a blueprint to have an operation plan that can be activated if a country invokes the article. Christodoulidis' remarks were echoed by European Council President Antonio Costa, who mentioned in his invitation letter to those attending the summit that the challenging geopolitical and security environment would be discussed in relation to Article 42.7. The European External Action Service, or the sort of Foreign Affairs Ministry of the EU, chairing the tabletop exercise, is also working on a report explaining how the processes would function. When asked by Euronews what specific scenarios are being examined on Monday, European Commission spokesperson Anita Hyper did not disclose details. She reiterated that EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has previously said discussions are ongoing. Sorry about that. Where was I? Kallas had previously clarified to Euronews that triggering the... Wait. No, I skipped a sentence. On Monday, the focus will be on how to support member states and the implementation of the mutual assistance clause, she said. Kallas had previously clarified to Euronews that triggering the treaty's collective defense clause does not contravene Article 5 of the NATO military alliance, which states an attack on one is an attack on all 32 members. She also said the tabletop exercise will span 3 scenarios. The first will be a simulated attack on an EU country that is not a NATO ally, such as Austria, Cyprus, Ireland, and Malta. So you can't rely on NATO because it's not a member of NATO. What do you do? The second is an attack on a country that is a member of the EU and NATO to see how the clauses correspond. The final is an attack that falls below NATO's threshold because of its hybrid nature. So you can't activate Article 5, but maybe you could activate Article 42.7. Depends. there's a very strong European pillar in NATO that is there and is actually stronger now because we are all making more investment in our defense, she added. The EU's mutual defense clause has only been invoked once, it was by France in 2015 following the terrorist attacks in Paris. And back then, like it was more of a political gesture more than anything. Like, so France activated Article 42.7. Other member states said, yes, we're supporting you. In practice, what happened was that there was no, actually, like, the activation of 42.7 was a political declaration at EU level, but then the actual assistance that was provided was done on a bilateral level, meaning that it was not happening at EU level, and so France said, okay, I demand support through 42.7, this is a bunch of things that I would need, and then I will talk to each of you bilaterally to see how you can help me out. So most of the discussion on how that assistance is provided actually happened outside of the EU remit. It was then France talking to Germany, France talking to the UK, etc., etc. France was saying, okay, basically what France wanted is that they wanted to repatriate troops that were currently in Africa, bring the troops back in France to participate to the secularization of the territory, Vigipiat, etc., etc. And so they wanted European forces to either replace the French that were going back to France, or reinforce the French position, some intelligence sharing, etc., etc. But it was mostly political, at least at European level, and then operationally, it was done bilaterally. And so, yeah, member states responded to the request unanimously by providing intelligence sharing and logistical aid. That was then negotiated, like I said, bilaterally. Any question about that before we move on to the final topic, which is going to be the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. Up. I don't see any question. Then let's move on. All right, Mercosur. The Mercosur, this sort of trade. Sorry. Would we need a treaty change to create a European integrated command? Huh. Probably yes. If you want to make it like a properly like EU mechanism, I would say yes, because you would need to change the to some degree, I think, the competence on defense to give like a European integrated command would basically mimicking what exists at NATO level. So central command. I believe I would say you would need treaty change to create a proper competence of the EU on defense that would be exercised through the European integrated command. So I would say yes. Currently, like on defense, like the EU can't do much today. It's very much like a national competence. It's mostly coordination, exchange of information. Okay, you have 42.7, but that is mostly like a political statement. Today, like I say, usually when we talk about a European defense policy, today it's actually more of an industrial policy, more than a proper defense policy. The EU does not have troops, does not come. Well, you have a rapid reaction force, but that is under the control of Council. So, it's true that we have the rapid deployment forces, I would still think that to get something like an integrated command, probably we need treaty change, but we do have the rapid deployed forces. To be checked, but I think you would need a reform of the treaties. I mean, again, if needs be, member states know, and member states in the Commission know how to be very creative in their interpretation of existing treaty clauses, but to have something that is like properly done, I would say treaty changes, but then it would raise the question, okay, but why are we duplicating something that exists already in NATO? Again, you would have all the questions about NATO, about the neutral countries, etc., etc. All right. Let's continue. Up. All right. So Mercosur, what was I saying about Mercosur? Yeah, so Mercosur, this trade organization that is representing part of the South America. Since late last year, there is a trade agreement between the EU and Mercosur. That agreement is in the process of being ratified. The Parliament has sent the thing to the court for verification. But last Friday, the deal became provisionally applicable, meaning that on a good chunk of it, on the trade part of it, the deal is already applying, even before the formal ratification. Since that deal was very controversial, especially, I mean, like every trade deal, but this one was particularly controversial. What's going on then? So the EU-Mercosur deal takes effect, but the fight over it goes on. The trade accord with the South American bloc will boost exports of car and champagne, but political wrangling over it persists. Large parts of the EU mega trade deal with the Latin American Mercosur bloc finally kicked in Friday, but the political fight over it continues. Negotiations started in 1999 and have been marked by repeated setbacks, leaving officials in Brussels wondering whether the deal to create a 720 million persons free trade area would ever take effect. The European Commission is provisionally applying the trade part of a broader pact with the Mercosur countries, so Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And I think Bolivia has joined Mercosur, and so there is a discussion on how to cover them, to include them as well in the deal. Final ratification of the agreement will take a while longer, however, after the European Parliament voted to send it for legal review to the EU's highest court. I had something in my throat that's very annoying. Provisional application marks a qualitative shift in EU-Mercosur relations. After a history of more than 2 decades, the agreement is now beginning to take practical effect, said Pablo Sader, Uruguay's ambassador to the EU. At the same time, May the 1st should be viewed with a clear perspective. It is not the final destination, but the opening of a new phase, he told Politico. Here's what you need to know about the deal as it finally takes effect. So Germany long championed the deal to boost its car and machinery exports, while France and Poland opposed it, fearing that cheap beef and poultry from Brazil and Argentina would undercut their powerful farming sectors. French President Emmanuel Macron intervened to halt the deal in early 2024, but subsequent election defeats meant he could no longer hold back Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's push to close it. She shook hands with Mercosur leaders in December of that year and, after another last-minute struggle, signed the accord this January. The pro-deal camp led by Germany had the necessary supermajority to task the Commission with implementing the trade part of the deal. Von der Leyen went through with it, even after MEPs voted by a narrow margin to send the agreement for review by the Court of Justice of the EU. The Parliament wanted send it to the CJU to see if the agreement is compliant with the treaties, which can take up to 2 years. And so in reaction, the Germans say, okay, let's move on with the provisional application because we're not going to wait for 2 years for that ruling to come. And since the Parliament agreement was not necessary for the provisional application to take place, because it's a council prerogative, as soon as the conditions for it were applied, the Commission went with it. The agreement will gradually eliminate duties on more than 90% of EU exports, including on cars, pharmaceuticals, wine and spirits, and olive oil. I like how they specifically say olive oil. Very important. Some so-called non-tariff barriers, such as on labeling, will be removed. Public procurement markets will open up, allowing EU companies to bid for government contracts. The Commission estimates that EU exports to the Mercosur region will grow by 39% through 2040 to 50 billion euro. The benefits are real and visible as of now, von der Leyen said in a post on X. Tariff starts falling, companies are gaining access to new markets, investors have the predictability they need. But gains will be slower to materialize on some products. In most cases, the tariff reduction will be phased out over a period of 10 to 15 years. So it's not on day one you go to zero, you gradually reduce them to create a transition period that allows the economic sectors to prepare for it and to adapt for it. Same thing for the quota. The economic effect will therefore become apparent primarily in the medium to long term, said Olivier Richbert, head of the foreign trade at Germany's VDMA Engineering Federation. But not for French champagne, which, along with other sparkling wines, is already duty-free, down from a previous 20% tariff. At the same time, Mercosur beef export to Europe will be subject to a lower 7.5% tariff on the first 99,000 metric tons annually. Anything above that, and again, that will never happen, will still be charged at 40%. I say it never happened because in treaties, in trade agreements, you have quotas of exports for meat, for instance. That's a maximum, that's a ceiling. In practice, there's not a single trade agreement where the counterpart reached that maximum quota. So the ceiling of 99,000 metric ton exists. It is very, 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 very unlikely that it will be reached. Always quote the CETA precedent, so the agreement with Canada. From memory, there is a quota of like 45,000 tons of beef. That agreement has been active for now 9 years. After 9 years, the Canadians are exporting 4,000 to 5,000 tons per year. So fairly far from the maximum of 45,000 tons. So again, the very, very unlikely that Brazilian or Mercosur exports would go up to 99,000. So the EU produces that amount of beef in about 5 days. Basically saying, well, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of beef that is produced in Europe. The first installment of the agriculture quota will happen on both sides and hardly anyone will notice. Certainly, there will be no visible effect in the EU beef market, said Rupert Schlegelmilch, a former Commission official who negotiated the agreement. Provisional application will be a fairly quiet process, he added. Within sight of the finish line, it was European lawmakers who sent the deal into extra time with their request for a judicial review. That means the Parliament may have to wait up to 2 years before it can hold a final consent vote on the full partnership agreement, which would supersede the interim trade agreement that has just been entered into force. Parliaments in the 27 EU member countries also need to ratify the accord. Actually, no. Well, okay. Yes and no. On the trade part, you do not need the vote of the 27 member countries. On the non-trade part of the agreement, yes. Because it's a mixed agreement. But the Commission splits the agreement to enable the vote of the trade part separately. So the ratification by the 27 member states, not on the trade part. Europe can be confident that by the time Parliament takes its final decision, the agreement will already have borne economic and political fruit, said Bert Lange, a German social democrat who chairs the European Parliament's Trade Committee. In the view of Trade Commissioner soonᵀᴹ, the Mercosur deal will withstand the legal review since many of the questions raised were satisfactorily addressed in the earlier scrutiny of the trade deal with Singapore. So basically, they're saying, yeah, okay, it was actually already dealt with, everything is compliant, so we are not afraid of the CJU. If either the Court of Justice or lawmakers ultimately reject the agreement, the European Commission would have to go back to the drawing board. With China having already ousted the EU as a Mercosur top trading partner, that is a luxury the bloc cannot afford, said soonᵀᴹ. By 2032, we will be back in the situation from 10 years ago, he told lawmakers earlier this year. One potential positive effect is that other countries, Colombia and Panama, are now interested in joining Mercosur. Venezuela, suspended during late President Hugo Chávez's rules, is eyeing a return, and Bolivia is making quiet progress. So the area covered by Mercosur could become even bigger. A source close to Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, said that expanding our partnerships with new partners is a way to promote other poles of regional integrations, and also finding alternatives to the US market, notably. Any question on that before we move on the second article on Mercosur up, which goes into why it's a bit more quiet around Mercosur now, compared to a few months ago where we had the impression that the entire world was going to burn because of it. Alright, I don't see anything. Let me just do this. Okay. Okay, let's go. So, from Amazon outrage to realpolitik, how the EU-Mercosur climate fight cooled. Is any ratification needed from member states? Okay, so that's the part where it's semi-complicated. The Mercosur trade deal initially is what is called a mixed agreement. What are mixed agreements? A mixed agreement is a trade agreement that covers CJU. No, the English is the CJU. We still use the CJU. What was I saying? So, what was I saying? Yeah, trade agreement that is mixed. Mixed, why? Because in the Mercosur agreement, you have one part that is trade, and trade is shit. I'm losing my EU jargon. Shit. A full competence of the EU, an exclusive competence of the EU, meaning only the EU has a competence over it. So you have this trade part, and you have another part that covers political cooperation, investment, other bunch of stuff that depend on a mixed competence, meaning those are topics where the EU and member states both have some competencies on it. So in theory, a trade agreement that is mixed is supposed to go through the most demanding ratification process, which is for mixed competencies. You need, so everything that relates to investment, political cooperation, etc., etc. You need the agreement of Council, European Parliament, and all the member states, including, where it is necessary, their parliaments, or sometimes even regional parliaments. Here we're talking, when you have a vote like this, it means that there is about 50 parliaments that must vote and have a veto right. Each of them. That's because of the mixed competence, the shared competence. But when you have an agreement that is only on trade, you don't need the vote of the national parliament. You only need the vote of the Council and the vote of the European Parliament. So what happened in the case of Mercosur is that the deal was negotiated as a mixed agreement. But the Commission, towards the end, said, well, I'm going to split the agreement. I'm going to separate the part that is trade, which is exclusive competence of the EU, and the part that is mixed competence, shared competence with the member state. And each are going to be voted according to their respective procedure. Meaning that for the trade part of Mercosur, which is the most important, you don't need the vote of the member states. So you only need Council and Parliament. Exactly. The national parliament will vote on the non-commercial part of the Mercosur agreement, which are not the part that are problematic. Like politically, actually, people are pissed off about the trade part. The non-trade part, they don't give a shit actually about it. So now we have a provisional application of the trade part of the Mercosur agreement. The ratification is suspended for 2 years until the CJU has given its opinion. And then Parliament will vote, and we will know whether or not ça fait des chocs à pic. To what extent the CJU could change the agreement? So the CJU will not change the agreement. What the CJU is tasked of doing is to check whether the agreement is compliant with the EU treaties. And Parliament notably mentions the procedure, they mention the respect of the environment, blah 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 blah. That's what the CJU will assess. If the CJU says, okay, it goes fine, the deal is validated, it goes straight to ratification to the Parliament. But if the CJU says, well, actually, there is an issue, it depends on how they say it. There, I'm inventing scenarios. You could have a scenario where the CJU would say, okay, the deal in itself is compliant with the treaties, but the Commission should not have splitted the agreement. They should have remained a single agreement. Therefore, that means that the ratification must be, including on the trade part, for all member states. So national parliament will have to vote as well on the commercial part. Scenario number one. Scenario number two, the CJU could say, well, no, actually, this agreement is breaking this part of the treaties. It's not compliant with, I don't know, the requirement of the EU to ensure that environment protection is guaranteed. So there, what would happen is that ratification process would restart, and then Parliament will be heavily incentivized to say no, actually. And if Parliament says no, you go back to the drawing board, and Commission must knock again at the door of Mercosur, say, okay, my CJU and the Parliament said no for XYZ reason, we need to renegotiate and change the deal in a way that is compliant with the treaties, blah, 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 blah. So it's only indirectly, like the CJU cannot, like, cannot change the content of the deal, but it can put red lines that could force the Commission ultimately to renegotiate the agreement one way or another, assuming that Mercosur agrees to that. It's a possibility that Mercosur could say, screw this, we don't want that deal anymore. Or ask more changes because they say, oh, okay, you're asking this from us, we want this in exchange. So you're reopening Pandora's box and you have to restart the entire negotiation. So yeah, pretty much those are the scenarios. It either affects the ratification process or indirectly lead to a form of renegotiation of the agreement, assuming then that the Mercosur countries would want to modify it. What are the most likely parts to be rejected by a CJU? I mean, it depends on what you think of the Mercosur agreement. On the content, I'm not sure. I mean, I doubt the CJU will have anything to say. It's maybe on the procedure. That's where the procedure could be impacted. If the CJU considers that the Commission went beyond its power by splitting the deal, that is actually what the opponents in the Parliament want. Because then that gives back a veto to the member states, and then obviously that changes a bit the thing. You can imagine how a vote in the French National Assembly would go on Mercosur. De facto, sort of killing the agreement. Unless the government decides not to do it. You have this situation that is a bit absurd. For instance, on CETA, so the trade agreement with Canada, also a mixed agreement, but that was not splitted. Meaning that all the national parliaments have to vote. And in the case of the French, you had, I always forget if it's the Senate or the National Assembly, that voted against the ratification of CETA. So they rejected the deal. But that's the funny part. Funny, it depends on how you interpret it. That did not mean that CETA was dead. Why? Because for a veto, for the ratification to be officially rejected and de facto CETA being cancelled, what you need is not the vote to happen. You need the country consent, so the government, to notify the commission we have decided to reject the ratification, to reject the deal. But as long as that notification is not taking place, nothing happens. So the Senate has, or the National Assembly, I always forget which one of the two has done it, has voted against CETA, but the government has not notified it to the Commission, and so CETA is not rejected. And what that means also is that the French government could decide, well, I will ask again the question. And ask again the question as long as they want, until maybe they get the answer that they want. But that's a bit the absurd part, that technically you have one body of the French parliament that said no, but the French government is not notifying the no to the commission in order not to kill CETA. That's a bit the absurd part of this. And so, technically, the Senate could change its mind at some point, and vote in favor of it. Or keep the situation as it is, which is CETA applying provisionally. So, like the absurd thing is that since we have this system of provisional application, so the text applies even if it is not fully ratified, which is a common thing in international agreement. It's not unheard of. That's a classic thing. But because of the political sensitivity of trade agreements, provisional applications would replace full applications. Because it's not politically feasible to go through a full ratification, well then, only the provisional application becomes the standard. Which leads to another debate on how wide trade agreements must be. Because for now, we need these votes at the national parliaments, because they are mixed agreements. They have trade, but also not only trade. So there is a debate on whether we should go for smaller trade agreements. Like that instead of having agreements that try to cover everything, they should only do trade. That way it's just a trade agreement, and it's only an exclusive competence of the EU, and so you only need Council and European Parliament, and you don't need to bother with the 50 parliaments. So you also have like a novel question around the structure of trade agreements, and the EU is also moving towards these smaller scale agreements to make the negotiation not as long, simplify the ratification process, and also, to a certain extent, because we're kind of running out of countries with who you can make like these very large agreements. Now we are moving in an era where we could have like much more smaller or more targeted agreements, trade agreements between the EU and other countries. The insight is that the government's task is to be the messenger. It is, but my right now is bypassing the will of parliaments and thus the will of the people. I agree that it creates a very, very absurd situation. I agree with that. It's extremely absurd as a situation. But like, I'm not like we would have to look into the procedure. You know what? Let's look into it. Because the question I'm wondering in the case of France, Is a ratification valid only when the two assemblies have voted or not? Because you could have a situation where you had a vote in one of the institutions but not the other. And so technically, the ratification is not over. Let's see. Ratification, accords commerciaux, France, procédure. Let's see. Okay, ratification of treaties. Let's see. Yeah, sure. Okay. Procédure parlementaire. Examination of committee. Blah blah blah. Well, is that trade agreement or is it only for? Okay, yeah, it does cover. No. Okay, they can't amend, of course. Par ailleurs, les accords par l'Union européenne soumis au Parlement. Assemblée plus Sénat. I'm reading through the whole thing to. Can't find the exact procedure. I have debates of the constitutional treaty. Data, blah 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 blah. Okay, parliamentary procedure. Yeah, but it covers only National Assembly, so. Okay, I will need to double check exactly how it works. I'll double check. Anyway. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, yeah. For a second, I didn't already read that. No, we were about to start this the article. Okay. Dernière ligne droite. Up, going back to the right thing. Okay, let's go. So anti-Mercosur rhetoric was once dominated by calls for climate awareness. Was it all just political opportunism? Much ink has been expended in recent months on farmers' concerns over the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement, which entered into force provisionally on Friday after more than 2 decades of negotiations. It's a marked shift from the climate concerns and calls to preserve the Amazon, which dominated anti-Mercosur rhetoric when the Green Deal was in vogue. Those arguments now seem to have faded, largely confined to a handful of green politicians and long-opposed NGOs and think tanks. What changed? Was it all political opportunism? Or did the Commission manage to address what once seemed like insurmountable sustainability concerns? The answer is somewhat in between. French leaders have at least been consistent in their opposition to the deal, cycling through counter-arguments from forest conservations to pesticides. The Mercosur agreement has become one of the most toxic political issues in France and a rare issue that cuts across the political spectrum. From left to right, the deal is spanned. Like you remember when there was a vote in the European Parliament, you did not have a single French MEP that voted in favor or even abstained on the agreement. In the summer of 2019, Macron's focus latched onto Amazon deforestation, which saw the French president accuse his Brazilian counterpart Jair Bolsonaro of lying about environmental protection. Was Macron sincere or simply jumping on the climate bandwagon? Even some of the deal's fiercest critics, such as Greenpeace, acknowledged that environmental concerns had become politically convenient. 2019 marked the peak of the EU's own climate ambitions and was the year the Commission unveiled the European Green Deal, its flagship plan to cut emissions by 2050. So, Macron was saying, let's protect the Amazon. The Amazon was more likely a good excuse to protect French farming interests, more than anything. If the EU was tightening its own environmental standards, call for reciprocity from trade partners followed naturally, especially from regions with weaker regulatory frameworks, such as Mercosur. In this context, creating an EU anti-deforestation law, the EUDR, originally championed by France, appeared to offer a neat solution. By requiring companies to prove that products sold in the EU from beef to soy, cocoa, and coffee were not linked to deforestation, the law promised to square the circle between trade openness and environmental protection. In practice, however, the law has struggled to take root, and the EUDR has faced repeated delays and has become entangled in the EU's broader push for simplification/deregulation. Privately, many EU insiders also highlight flaws in how the legislation was drafted. But when it comes to Mercosur, such delays mean the deal will come into force months before the deforestation law kicks in from the 30th of December. Green MEP Kai Tegenhoft from the transnational party Volt told our active he is concerned about the implementation gap between the two. We will effectively be allowing commodities like soy, coffee, and cocoa to enter the Union without rigorous deforestation-free due diligence, he said, urging the Commission not to present a further delay. Bon. Okay, that's the link with deforestation. Bon. Alongside separate environmental legislation like EUDR, the EU negotiated an additional environmental annex to the Mercosur deal. Lula da Silva's return to Brazil's presidency in 2023 paved the way to sealing the agreement with reinforced green guarantees. Agreed years after the core text was finalized in 2019, the annex reinforces commitments on deforestation and, crucially, makes the Paris Agreement an essential element of the deal. In practical terms, this means that a future government reneging on its climate commitments could provide grounds to suspend the agreement. So, if one of the Mercosur countries was to say, I'm leaving the Paris Agreement, the EU could say, oh well, then I'm suspending the Mercosur Agreement. Which is seen as one of the reasons why Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, it is seen as one of the reasons why Milei did not follow the lead of Trump when Trump announced that the US was leaving again the Paris Agreement. Milei didn't follow suit. Many say that estimate that the reason why Milei didn't follow that was because of the EU-Mercosur deal. Because if Argentina was to say, I'm leaving the Paris Agreement, Mercosur would be threatened. The suspension of the Mercosur Agreement would only be for the country dropping from the Paris Agreement or for all the Mercosur countries? Good question. I would say both. I mean, you could interpret it in both ways. You could say there are some things where you could potentially target a given country. So you could say, oh yeah, it only affects the Argentinian part of the quota. But it depends on the level of single market within Mercosur, and I'm not sure about that. But and given that the agreement is with Mercosur as a bloc, not the individual parts of the Mercosur, I would say probably there would be a negotiation over it. I would say that in principle, the agreement could be suspended for the entire Mercosur, theoretically. Then, depending on how it works, how you can separate like the contribution of one country or the other. In a negotiation, you could say, okay, I maintain the Mercosur agreement, but I suspend only the country that is dropping from the Paris Agreement. That would be my guess. There. Where was I? Hi. David Kleiman, a Brussels-based trade expert at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, also noted that the trade pillar now in force also commits parties to not lowering environmental standards under a non-regression principle. The agreement de facto strengthened the Lula administration, which has made the fight against deforestation one of its core political priorities, Kleiman said. For some observers, this is far from trivial. Irene Milla, senior fellow for Latin America at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, describes the outcome as a notable experiment in climate diplomacy and posits that it could even be a blueprint for both future trade agreements and minilateralism, where a small group of major economies cooperate on specific issues as traditional multilateral forums stall. But although Mercosur finally looks like a done deal, criticism has not dissolved. Green politicians and environmental NGOs remain skeptical, even if some have shifted to a more pragmatic tone as the EU seeks to secure new allies in an increasingly volatile geopolitical landscape. Basically, NGOs know that talking about the Amazon politically is not a strong argument, so now they're shifting to look at the poor farmers. Or look at dependencies, etc., etc. They move to a more like a geopolitical argument. Roderick Käferputz, director of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, a think tank affiliated with Germany's Green Party, acknowledged the tension. Geopolitics hasn't simply trumped climate concerns, Käferputz said. In a more fragmented global environment, defined by a breakdown of the global rule-based order, it is only natural that balances in this regard shift and are not set in stone. For Käferputz, environmental concerns remain highly relevant. But so too is strengthening ties with Latin America in the current circumstances. Whether the deal lives up to its green billing will ultimately come down to implementation. Much will depend on how enforceable these commitments are in practice, how robust the monitoring mechanism will be, and whether there are credible ways to address non-compliance. With provisional applications now underway, that test begins in earnest. So it will be a bit of a laboratory to see if including green conditions in trade agreements actually leads to something or not, which will give lessons for future trade agreements, etc., etc. But again, since there is this tendency now of saying, okay, the era of the very large trade agreement is over, let's go to smaller scale agreements. Maybe that is becoming also a bit irrelevant because saying, yeah, well, okay, since we're doing more limited agreements with countries that are also more complicated to negotiate with, we don't need this sort of thing. But yeah, the green argument has become less important politically, and also we have the evolution of the geopolitical context. Any question about that or on anything else since we reached the final article? Otherwise, I will begin my conclusion and tell you about Saturday. Up. That I can do. Okay. All right. I don't see questions for now. Next up. Next time I see you, Friday, as usual, for the news review in French. 2 cents about the Romania situation. Not much at the moment. I haven't read, so the Romanian government has fallen following a motion of censure pushed by the far right and the socialists. So for now, there's a bit of a wait and see situation. I haven't read much into it. Depending on how things evolve, maybe we'll talk about it on Friday. But for now, the question that is being raised is does the vote between AUR and the PSD, so the Socialist Party in Romania, is it akin to what the EPP has done? Blah blah blah. There's a bit of a debate over that. So it'll be interesting to see what is the reaction of the Socialist Party, the Social Party, the Socialist group at EU level, and what's the situation. But apart from that, not much to say at this stage. Maybe on Friday we'll know more. And yeah, speaking of Friday, so Friday at 5 news review in French. Saturday, Europe Day, so stream. We'll start around 9:30 in English. I'm still finalizing a bit the program. I will let you know on Thursday, most likely, the detailed agenda. But yeah, morning will be in English. Afternoon will be in French, with different things for both periods. Probably I will do a cut in between, for lunchtime to go touch some grass, etc. But yeah, on Saturday we'll have a big stream for Europe Day with various things to keep us busy. Of course, if on your side you have ideas of things you would like me to see during those streams, you let me know, and we'll see what can be done. What else can I tell you? Next week we are doing a reverse schedule because on Tuesday I have a Eurogamer at 7 on the Arte channel. So that means that on Wednesday at 7 we'll do the news review in French plus the debriefing of Eurogamer, and the Friday stream will be the news review in English. Can I sing the EU anthem in German? Technically, I could tell you, and I could tell you yes, and actually trick you, because the EU anthem does not have lyrics. So I could do no lyrics in French, German, Croat, or whatever. There is no lyrics in the EU anthem. So I could get you on a technicality. That would be possible. Yeah, but that is not the EU anthem. That is another thing. You only know the first 2 lines. That's the Ode to Joy. The Ode to Joy does have lyrics that are in German, but the EU anthem, which takes Ode to Joy, does not have lyrics. Actually, that would make for an interesting discussion. Because there was a whole debate on should there be lyrics or no lyrics in the EU anthem, etc., etc. That could be something funny to discuss and to explain on Saturday at some point. But yeah, otherwise, what do I have to tell you? Not much. If you like what you saw, of course, follow the channel. If you really like what you saw, do toss a coin to your streamer via a Prime or a sub. Link to up my socials right there. So Twitter, Discord, all the good things, you know how it works. And yeah, otherwise, I hope to see you on Friday for the news review in French, or on Saturday for the stream in English in the morning and in French in the afternoon. On this note, I wish you all a good evening and see you Friday or Saturday. Bye everyone, see you next time.